How have all 50 states trended on a presidential level between 1968 and 2024? We're going to get the answer to that question in this video. Last week we took a look at the shifts or the swings in each state. Today we're going to compare those shifts to the national shifts, and that's going to give us the trends. If it's a little confusing, we'll break it down in just a minute. And if you want to just skip ahead to the map, there's a chapter down below in the description. But first, just like last week, we've got to quickly go through the background information. First up, the election that you might be less familiar with is 1968. That was Richard Nixon. He won his first term with 301 electoral votes. He got 32 states and 43.4% of the popular vote. The loss for the Dems was taken by Hubert Humphrey. He got 191 electoral votes and he carried 13 states and D.C. And that was worth 42.7%. Keep in mind the strong third-party challenger this time. That was George Wallace, part of the American Independent Party. He did get 46 electoral votes out of 5 states, and he took away 13.5% of the national popular vote. Then super quick in 24, Trump won it with 312. He got 31 states and Maine second, worth 49.8%. Kamala Harris lost with 226, 19 states. D.C. and Nebraska second at 48.3%. Now let's fire up the spreadsheet. On the left, we've got the states. Then it's the 68 vote for Humphrey, then for Nixon. Then it's the 24 vote for Harris, then Trump. Then it's the margin in 68 shaded accordingly. Then it's the same for 24. Then we've got the column from last week. These are the swings in each state. That's the difference between the two previous columns. The last column and the most important for this video is the trends. This will tell us how much each state moved compared to the national popular vote. And there's also shading. The darkest colors are 10 or more points. The lightest are under 5%. Before we get into it, keep in mind, George Wallace took in 13.5% of that popular vote. So when we jump all the way ahead to 2024, most of that percentage is going to be reallocated back into the two major parties. Now let's dive in here. First, we've got to get our national baseline. That's the national popular vote. In 68, Hubert Humphrey got 42.7. Richard Nixon won it with 43.4. Then 56 years later, Kamala Harris went up to 48.3. Trump went up to 49.8. The margin in 68 was 0.7% for Nixon. In 24, it was 1.5% for Trump. That's pretty easy math. That's an 0.8% swing toward Trump and the Republicans. So any state that swung more in that direction is going to have a red trend. Anything less than that is going to be a blue trend. So let's go through the first state just to clear up any confusion. First is Alabama, and this happened to be George Wallace's home state. He was the governor here, and this was one of the 5 states that he carried in the Deep South. So because he won the state, and he wasn't officially the Democrat or the Republican, I can't put his percentages on here. But in that election, Hubert Humphrey got in second place with 18.7. Richard Nixon got 14%. In 2024, Harris got 34.1. Here, Trump won the state with 64.6. The margin in 68, just between Humphrey and Nixon, was in favor of Humphrey by 4.7. Again, Wallace won the state, but this data is just comparing the Democrat and the Republican. And in 2024, the margin for Trump was 30.5. So that's 4.7 away from the Dems, another 30.5 toward the Republicans. That comes out to a total swing of 35.2 toward Trump and the Republicans. And that 35.2 is way ahead of that national swing of 0.8%. Once you take off that 0.8%, it comes out to a total trend of 34.4 toward the Republicans. So that's how this works. Hopefully it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of data here. Feel free to pause it if you'd like. Let's quickly go through most of the rest of these states. Alaska had a trend toward the Republicans of 9.7. In Arizona, that state went in the other direction. It was a much bigger margin for Nixon in 68. It swung 14.2 toward the Dems in 24. And that's in the opposite direction of the country. It moved 0.8% toward the right. So once you combine those numbers, it comes out to an even 15% trend toward the Dems. Arkansas was another one of the 5 states that was won by Wallace. But throughout everything, this state trended toward the Republicans by 29.4. Now we've got some blue trends. It's California at 24.1, Colorado 21. Connecticut 10.1, and Delaware 19. In Florida, they trended toward the right by 2.7. Georgia went toward the left at 2.2. Hawaii also by 2.8. Idaho got redder at 9.6, Illinois bluer by 14.6, Indiana redder at 5.8, and Iowa had the smallest trend out of all 50 states. It swung 1% toward the right. That comes out to a red trend of just 0.2%. Kansas trended bluer by 4.7. Kentucky was redder at 23.6. Louisiana also 25.9. Maine much smaller in that direction at 2.5. Maryland was bluer at a big 27.6. Massachusetts, it's a blue state, but it trended redder by 4.1. Also in that direction, it's Michigan at 7.3. Minnesota, Humphrey's home state, at 7.5. Mississippi is up there at 31.6. Missouri 16.4, and Montana 10.1. Now back in the other direction toward the Dems, it's Nebraska at 8.2, Nevada 5.9, New Hampshire 11.9, New Jersey 8.8, New Mexico 18.9, New York 7.8, and North Carolina 5.8. Then it's more GOP-friendly trends in North Dakota at 18, Ohio 10 less than that at 8, and Oklahoma back up there at 17.8. Oregon went toward the Dems at 21.1, Pennsylvania back toward the right at 4.5, Rhode Island, a blue state but a big red trend of 17.7, South Carolina also 8.5, South Dakota 17, Tennessee 19.1, Texas 14.1, Utah a tiny red trend of 1%, Vermont had the biggest blue trend out of all the states, that moved by a big 41.6, Virginia same direction 17.4, Washington similar at 16.9, West Virginia, that state had the biggest trend out of all the states, that came in at a colossal 49.9 toward the Republicans. Wisconsin was toward the Dems at 3.5, and Wyoming was toward the GOP at 24.7, and Washington, D.C. was toward the Dems at an even 21. So those are all the states and all the trends. If you want to help visualize this data, let's take it all and put it on a map. If we do that, here it is. And we've got similar shading. The darkest colors are 10 or more. The very lightest colors this time are under 1%. Those are the tilt margins. There's only one state, that's Iowa. Utah was close, but that was at an even 1%. So 4 levels of shading. And what are the takeaways from any of these trends? Well, up top, using the current electoral votes, you can see states that went toward the Dems came in at 267. Republicans just barely more at 271. It's almost a perfectly even split. Much of the South and the upper Great Plains went hard toward the Republicans. Dems did pretty well on the West Coast, much of the Southwest, and parts of the East Coast. Some of the exceptions are Nebraska and Kansas. Those are red states, but they got bluer. You've also got Minnesota, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Those are blue states, but they did get redder. Rhode Island is probably the one that stands out the most because of all those shifts I just mentioned. That is the highest. It's into double digits, and it's the darkest color. If you look at the current 7 swing states today, those are all over the map. Arizona went hard toward the Dems. Nevada, North Carolina, less so, and Georgia even less than that. In the Rust Belt, Wisconsin went toward the Dems, but Michigan and Pennsylvania, they got redder. It makes it extra challenging to gauge anything from this data because of George Wallace winning 5 states of the Deep South. That kind of skews some of these numbers because both parties did gain in a lot of these states. Another factor might be the home state of the major candidates and their running mate. But ultimately, on the surface, these elections were not extremely different. Both of them competitive with the popular vote. And in the Electoral College, Republicans clearly won it, but it wasn't an absolute blowout. Nixon would go on to have one of those blowouts in his re-election bid in '72. So some similarities between these two elections, but if you just try to compare the electoral maps, they're totally different. In '68, you had California going red, Texas went blue, Vermont, New Jersey, and Oregon went red, while Washington and West Virginia went blue. That's what happens when you compare 5+ decades of political data. There's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of realignments. Things rarely stay the same for too long. All these states had their own reasons for moving in the directions that they did. But for now, that's it. These are the trends between 1968 and 2024. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about any of this data? Which states jump out to you the most? Are you surprised by how even it is? And what do you think about George Wallace pulling in more than 13% of the vote? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to help support the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.